Welcome to the next session of our course. In this session, we'll learn tools for adding specific materiality to your models, including different types of surfaces, colors, and textures. First, let's take a look at how materials are perceived in the real world. In the real world, light rays reach an object and bounce off of it. Depending on the type of material, the light can bounce off of it in many different ways. For example, this object here is made of a combination of wood and metal, and the wood, you'll notice, has a matte surface. It's not glossy, and there aren't any specular highlights on it. The metal does have a few specular highlights that you can see here. If we look at this object, it's a plastic object, and it has a lot of gloss and sheen to it. So the way that light interacts with these two different surfaces varies greatly. These light rays, or photons, then reach our eyes, and we perceive different types of materials, surfaces, colors, and textures. Similarly, in Maya, the way three-dimensional objects are represented depends on how virtual photons bounce off of the object's material. So in Maya, before we can add color or texture to a model, we first have to assign a specific material. That's what we'll cover in the first Maya demo. As we delve into designing the materiality, color, and texture of our models, we can also explore art direction to a greater degree. Art direction is the creative process of defining the look and feel of our 3D scenes. Some questions to consider for art direction are, what kind of materials do you want to represent? Wood? Metal? Plastic? What is the feel or the emotional takeaway of your 3D scene? How can the visuals support the emotional message of the scene? For example, is it bright and cheerful or dark and ominous? And what is the visual style you would like to convey? You can be inspired by paintings, live-action films, animated films, games, historical art movements, etc. To support your learning of both the Maya tools and the creative process, there will be two assignments for this session. The first assignment will be to add material and texture to at least one of your models in an exploratory fashion. Feel free to experiment with all the texturing techniques covered in this session without worrying too much about the end result. Play and explore. Assignment number 2 will be to add material and texture to one of your models with a specific art direction in mind. To help sharpen your art direction skills, you'll write up a description of your visual goals and upload stylistic reference images. Okay, now let's get back into Maya and learn how to leave the world of default gray for an exciting world of color and texture. In our first session, we explored 3D modeling to create geometry in various ways. Now in the second session, we'll explore adding materials, color, and texture to your models. In Maya, the underlying material of your object determines how it is going to respond to simulated light rays. To render your objects in 3D, Maya simulates light rays hitting the object and bouncing off of it. Some materials may be more reflective and shiny, while others are less shiny. So before you can add color or texture to your objects, you first have to add a material to them. Go ahead and create a few primitive objects in your scene to work with. I've created 3 primitive spheres, and we can add materials to them. Adding a material to an object is very easy. You simply mouse over the object and hold down the right mouse button, and then while still holding down the right mouse button, you move down to Assign New Material, and then Release. This will open up the New Materials menu. There are several materials and shaders already built into Maya that you can see right here. A shader is a little bit different from a material. It's more complex than a material. It's like a little small program that can include more than one material working in combination, or dynamic effects like an ocean wave simulation, which is this ocean shader here. For this introductory tutorial, we're going to focus on materials to start. And we're going to look at 3 of the most commonly used materials, which are Lambert, Blinn, and Phong. Lambert, this one right here, represents a matte surface, such as a matte painted surface or an unpolished surface. It's typically used for non-shiny surfaces without any strong specular highlights. So let's click on Lambert. As soon as we do that, we open up a window for the various options for our Lambert material. So here we can see there's a color option, and to change the color from the default gray, all we have to do is just click on this box here next to the word color, and it pulls up our color picker. So we can select one of these other colors and then adjust it in the color wheel, or using these sliders, which are the hue, saturation, and value sliders. So we can adjust the hue, saturation, and value. Once you're done with that, you can click off of that window, and you can also adjust the overall darkness and lightness of the color by adjusting the slider here as well. So I'll just go back and add my color back in there. There's a slider for transparency too, so you can adjust the amount of transparency of your model. And then a couple other settings. Ambient color is another color attribute which has to do with when ambient light is hitting the object. By default it's black, so it's turned off. And then incandescence is if there's a light being emitted by the object, such as if you're trying to simulate lava, you could change that to like a bright red type of color. Right now it's also turned off, just black. And there's various other settings. In the handout we have links to a more detailed discussion of what these settings are. So right now we're just going to go over the basics. That's the Lambert material. Let's move on to another material such as blend. So let's click on our second sphere and we can just mouse over it with our right mouse button and go to Assign New Material. And this time I'll click on the blend material, which is right here. So you can see right away that it has more of a specular highlight, whereas the Lambert material is a matte surface, no specular highlights. The blend material typically is used for metallic, shiny surfaces, and so it has the specular highlight here. Next, let's go ahead and put the Fong material on the third sphere. So we can right-click on this, go to Assign New Material, and select Fong. There's two options for the Fong material. There's Fong E and Fong. Fong E is a more basic version of the material, and it's less processor intensive. But since we have such a simple scene here, let's go ahead and just pick Fong. And you can see that that has the brightest specular highlight of the three. And the Fong material is used for glassy or glossy surfaces with hard specular highlights. So it's going to be the glossiest, most reflective surface of all. We can also adjust the actual colors of these. So once you've assigned the material, you can right-click. You don't need to go to Assign New Material to adjust that material. Instead, you go to Material Attributes. And now in this Material Attributes window, we can pick a color. So first I'm going to pick a color for my palette here, and then I can adjust it. And you can also adjust things like the transparency. And we'll touch on other settings such as bump mapping in a future tutorial. Let's also adjust our Fong material here. So I'm going to go to Material Attributes, right-click Material Attributes, holding down the right mouse button, and I can click on Color, and again I can adjust this according to what I would like this to be. Okay, so now we can see the difference between the Lambert, blend, and Fong materials. So in our preview window, we can see some of the ways that the material is reflecting the light, and then to get a more detailed view of that, we can do a one-frame render. And the button to do that is right up here at the top of our screen, the one that looks like a little clapboard, right here. So I'm going to click that. And this is going to give me a one-frame render of this moment in time. And so we can see more clearly now the difference between the Lambert, which is a matte surface, the blend surface, which is a little bit more shiny, and then the Fong surface, which is the shiniest of all. Okay, in the next video, we're going to actually cover how to add a texture map to your models. So using the material as a basis, we can actually add an image or some sort of texture to the models instead of just having a color. So I will see you in the next video. In this tutorial, we're going to learn how to add texture maps to our objects. Texture maps are bitmap images, such as JPEG, PNG, BMP, or TGA files. These can be digital photos, digital paintings, scans, anything you can save as a bitmap file. There are many free textures available online, and you can also make your own texture maps by taking your own photos and creating your own images. When taking your own photos for texture maps, always aim for flat, even lighting without shadows so that random shadows don't show up in your textures. The handout lists various resources for free textures, and you can also search for them online. For file organization, it is standard practice to place your texture maps in the source images folder of your project folder. So if I look at my screen here, we'll go to Documents, Maya, Projects, and then whatever project folder you're working in, whether it's the default folder or if you created your own folder, I created one called Cadenza Course. Within that folder, Maya will create various subfolders for different assets that Maya is going to need to use. And the source images folder is where we put our texture maps and also other types of maps that we're going to be using. So go ahead and download a few free texture maps and put them into this folder so that we can use them for this demo. Keep in mind that texture maps are not included with the scene file, which is the Maya MA or MB file that is saved in the scenes subfolder. These are actual animation files. The texture maps are not saved as part of that, so Maya links to the image rather than incorporate it into the Maya MA or MB file. So it's important to have a consistent place where you put those texture maps so that Maya will always be able to relink to them. So I placed a few texture maps into my source images folder, and I'd like you to do the same. Now we're ready to add these to our models. So we'll close that. Okay, so the first thing we do, I have a couple primitive shapes here. The first thing we do before we add a texture map is we have to add a material. So we're always going to be adding a material first. So I'll click first on my sphere, right-click, Assign New Material. This is very similar to what we did in the first demo. And I'll assign it a blend material, which is a little bit shiny. In the last tutorial, we talked about adding color by clicking on this color field right here. But instead of doing that, this time we're going to click on the checker box. And this way we can add an actual image instead of just a flat color to our object. So I'll click on the checker box. In this window, we can click on the word File to be able to access a texture file. So I clicked on the word File, and then in this window, we can see there's a space for image name. If I click on the folder, we can browse to where our texture maps are. So Maya is going to automatically bring us to our source images folder. And here I have a texture map of Jupiter, which I'm going to select. And notice it's a rectangular image. But in 3D, if we have a sphere, it's going to be distorted and wrapped around that sphere. So let's go ahead and click Open. In order to see it, we're going to need to hit 6 on the keyboard because that will enable the texture view mode. Sometimes it'll appear automatically, but if it doesn't, you can just hit 6 on the keyboard to be able to see your textures. To turn the textures off, you can just hit 5. And the only case where you might want to do that is if Maya is starting to slow down. It does take more processing speed to be able to show the textures all the time. So if it starts to slow down, you can go back to shaded mode without the textures, which is number 5 on the keyboard. So I'll put that back to number 6. So now we have a Jupiter texture on our sphere. So instead of just a flat color, we have pretty much endless possibilities on what kind of texture maps we can apply to our models. And because it is in the color field, they're called color maps, which makes sense. And we're going to be applying different types of maps, transparency maps and bump maps as well. So this is a color map. Basically, the bitmap information provides the color information for a model. Okay, one other aspect of color maps is that they can include transparency. So on this plane here, I'm going to apply a texture map that has a transparency built into it. So we can go right-click, Assign New Material. We always have to apply a material first. I'll click on Lambert, which is a matte surface, and then I'll click on my checker box here to apply a color map on the color line right here. Now I can click on the word File to access a file, and then click on the folder to browse. Again, it brings us to our source images folder, and I'm going to click on this image of a pine tree that has had the background removed. So this would be an easy way to simulate a forest. You could download various pine tree images or different types of trees and apply them to planes and kind of be able to provide the illusion of a forest without having to actually model it. That would mostly work if it's just going to be in the background, where we're not going to have to travel through the space as much. Okay, and you can see that there is transparency here. So some formats that support transparency are PNG, BNP, and TIFF. So if there's a texture map that's a JPEG, that automatically does not have transparency because it doesn't have an alpha channel on it. Transparency is always included in an additional channel called the alpha channel on those types of file formats. So PNG, BMP or TIFF, and you can usually search for specifically images that have a transparency to them. And also when you create your own images, you can mask out areas and make them transparent in a program like such as Photoshop. Okay, so there's a couple options for us. So I'd like you to go ahead and try applying some texture maps to your objects, and then in the next video we're going to learn how to adjust them further. In this demo, we're going to learn how to adjust the positioning of our texture maps. So first, let's apply a texture to this plane that I have here on the screen. I'll go to Assign New Material. I'll select Lambert for my material, and then to apply the texture map, on the color attribute, I'll click on the checker box and click on the word File. Lastly, I can click on the folder here to navigate to my file that I want to apply as a texture map. And in my source images folder, I've placed a brick texture that I'm going to use for this demo. So I'll click Open. As soon as I've applied that texture, I can see the texture in this little thumbnail, and also above that I see I have two tabs. One is for the file and the other is for placement of the file. So I can click on the Place 2D Texture tab to adjust the positioning of my texture. The first item we have here is interactive placement, and that only works with NURBS models, which is a different type of geometry, not polygonal models, which is what we're working with. So we're not going to deal with interactive placement. Instead, we're going to look at these other factors here. So coverage affects how much of the model is covered by the texture. And we can change this. 1 is 100% covered. If we change this to 0.5, we can see the result. And there is a little glitch in Maya where it doesn't always update this. What we can do to get it to update is to adjust our repeat UV. That's the repeat of the texture on our model. If I change this to 2, it will suddenly show the coverage as well. And you can see the coverage of the texture is not on the complete model. So let's go ahead and change repeat UV back to 1. So if you experience this glitch, this is one way around it. Okay, so whenever you see these two numbers here, the first number refers to the horizontal direction, and the second number refers to the vertical direction. So I'll just change these both back to 1. So in the horizontal direction, if I wanted it to only cover half of my model, I could change this to 0.5, which would be 50% of the model. 1 representing 100%. And in the vertical direction, if I only wanted it to cover half of the vertical direction, I could also change this to 0.5. So that's how you can affect the coverage. I'm going to change these both back to 1. Now let's adjust the repeat UV attribute. UV is a term applied to texture maps where U refers to the horizontal direction and V applies to the vertical direction. So in our regular space, 3D space, we have X and Y. And when we're dealing with textures, instead of using X and Y, because that would be confusing, the terms used are U and V. U for horizontal and V for vertical. So this first number here is for the U or horizontal direction. Right now it's repeating our texture just once, applying it once. If I change this to 2, in the horizontal direction it'll apply it twice. And I can also change the vertical direction, the second number here, to 2 as well. So now I have my texture applied 4 times, 2 in the horizontal and 2 in the vertical direction. One thing that can be useful, you'll see here that there's an obvious seam in our texture where it connects to the repeat. That's because this particular texture was not designed as a seamless texture. Seamless textures are designed so that the edges line up when they're repeated and there won't be a seam. And you can actually search for seamless textures online or make your own in a program like Photoshop. So in this case, this texture has seams, but we can minimize the effect of that by turning on the mirroring. So here we have the mirror U, which is a mirror in the horizontal direction, and mirror V, which is mirroring in the vertical direction. So I can click on mirror U, check that, and also mirror V. And so it's mirroring the texture along the horizontal and vertical axis, and you can see that the actual seams are somewhat minimized. Still looks a little strange, so I would probably edit this to become a seamless texture if I was going to use it over a large area. Okay, we can look at some of our other controls here. Translate frame just shifts the texture map over in either the horizontal or vertical direction. So I could change this to 0.5, it shifted it over in the horizontal direction, and I could change this to 0.5 as well. Okay, so that's translate frame. Rotate frame actually rotates the texture map. So you can adjust this according to the number of degrees you'd like to rotate the texture map. I'd like to show you how that's different from rotate UV, this other option below. Rotate UV will rotate each of the individual tiles of the texture map. Whereas rotate frame rotates the entire map on the object. Okay, if we click on stagger, that is going to stagger the repeats of our texture map. So instead of repeating them exactly the same one on top of the other, it's going to offset it by 50%. And then the wrap UMV simply means that it's going to be wrapping the texture map around the object. And we usually leave that on by default. So we already talked about repeat UV. You can change this to a higher number if you want. Like if you have a very long brick wall, you'd probably want to repeat it many times. And it might just be repeated in one direction. So we could change the repeat in the horizontal direction to a higher number. So these two numbers can be different, either in the horizontal direction or the vertical direction, just to 3 as well. Offset will again stagger the texture and actually staggers the individual tiles. And then noise will just add a little bit of noise to the image. So right now it's set to 0, which is off, and we can just change this to say 0.2. And you see it'll distort the image and add noise to it. So these are some different ways that you can position the texture on your object once you've actually set it up to be on the object itself. In the next video, we're going to be talking about a couple other options related to transparency maps and bump maps. See you in the next video. Earlier, we discussed how you can build transparency into your color maps by using the alpha channel or transparency channel that's available in PNG, BMP, or TIFF files. You can also define transparency on your models by adding a transparency map. Let's see how this works. Here I have a sphere. I've already applied a material to it, and to access my material attributes, I can right-click on it and go to Material Attributes. I don't need to go to Assign New Material because I have already assigned a material. So let's click on Material Attributes. Now I have my various material and texturing options on the right-hand column here. Under Transparency, we can adjust the slider to adjust the overall transparency of the object, but we can also apply a transparency map by clicking on this checker box here to add that file. That brings up this window, and there are several built-in transparency maps that we could use. One is Checker, so let's go ahead and click on that to see what that looks like. Now you can see that some of the areas of the sphere are transparent. We can also adjust that by tweaking these sliders here. So in a transparency map, the white areas are transparent and the black areas are opaque. And anything gray would fall between those two extremes. By the way, if the transparency map does not appear on your sphere, try hitting 6 on the keyboard to reset your textures. Okay, that's how you do a transparency map. Now let's talk about bump maps. I'm going to create a primitive cube to apply a bump map to. Scale it up a bit. So this doesn't have a material yet. So first, I'm going to apply a material. That's always the first thing you do. So assign new material. And let's go ahead and make this a blend material. I'm going to be applying a bump map to this object. And for bump maps, the Fong material is not recommended. The specular highlights in the Fong material can lead to some strange rendering artifacts, such as flickering in the texture if you're using a bump map. So if you have a shiny type of object, use the blend material instead. So I'll click on blend. Now I see, I have my usual settings that I can adjust here. For the bump map, we would actually go to this line where it says bump mapping, and we can click on our checker box to access more files. So you could try some of these built-in textures, which can work as a bump map, but I'm going to go ahead and click on File to import my own unique bump map. So I'm going to click on File. If it doesn't immediately pop up, I need to click on the File tab in order to be able to select a file. Once you do that, you can click on the folder icon, and this will take us to our source images folder where we keep all of our texture maps that we'd like to bring into Maya. Okay, so I have different bump maps here. This looks interesting. It's a metal bump map. So I'm going to go ahead and open this up. And this was simply downloaded from the internet. There's lots of free bump maps available, and they're all grayscale images because it's the grayscale value that determines what's going to look higher or lower on the surface. Okay, so that's our bump map. And you'll see here that bump maps are useful for making an object look embossed or with some shallow hills and valleys in the actual geometry. So it achieves this by not changing the geometry itself, but changing how light interacts with the surface to give the illusion of bumps. So it's only really useful for very shallow types of bumps. Nothing too extreme due to the fact that it's not actually changing the geometry. So the white areas are the ones that are raised, and the black areas are the ones that are depressed. And then the gray areas would be in between those two extremes. Okay, so that's how you apply a bump map. I'd like you to go ahead and try these new techniques on your own models. Try applying transparency maps and also bump maps. You can either download some from the internet or create your own. They're basically grayscale images that give the information. And always remember you have to apply a material first before you can access these various texturing options. Explore and have fun. In terms of texturing, so far we've learned how to add a material, add a color map, a transparency map, and a bump map. We've applied these to entire objects, but they can also be applied to specific faces that you select on your model. This gives you more options for detailing the textures on your models. For example, on the sphere, I can select certain faces and apply color and textures to just those specific faces. To do so, you right-click on the object and we want to go into face mode, so we can select individual faces, and then I can just simply select faces by holding down Shift. Now I can assign a new material to them, so I can right-click, assign new material, and I'll pick Lambert. And here I can adjust the color to make it whatever I want. And then I can select other faces and give them a different color or texture. So I can right-click, assign new material, select, I can even make these blend instead. I could also apply a texture map instead of just changing the color. I can apply a color map. I can click on this, go to File, and once I do that, I click on the folder to be able to browse to my source images. All right, I can select the Jupiter map if I wanted to give a little bit of the Jupiter texture on the sphere. And then if I go back to object mode, I can click off of that. So you can see how now the sphere has different parts of it that are textured according to what I set. I could even make the top part transparent if I wanted. So I can right-click again to go to face mode, select the top faces, maybe just these top ones here. And again, I can right-click, assign new material. This time I'll apply another Lambert material. And then under transparency, I can just simply adjust the slider here or apply a transparency map if I want to have a more complex transparency on there. So this opens up lots more options for texturing just specific parts of your model. Another thing we can discuss right now is how to group your models together if they're made from more than one object. Sometimes you might create several different pieces of geometry just to create one model. And for ease of use and organization, it's nice to group those together. So let me go ahead and delete this sphere. Go back to object mode, select it, and hit delete. I've created a column which I would like to group together. I just simply selected the entire thing and moved it over. But it's just individual pieces. So to group these together, there's a couple different methods, and we're going to go through both of them. One is using the group command, and the other is using the combine command. The combine command actually creates a new piece of geometry that has all of the meshes combined, whereas group simply places all the objects into a hierarchy that can be selected. All right, and one of the things we'll need to do is learn a couple new tools for this. So one is an interface feature to be able to see all the items in our scene in an outline format. So to use that, I'm going to click on this mode here where I can see two windows at once. So this item here, now I can see two windows. You see the icon of two different boxes? That will give us the two window view. One of the windows I'm going to leave as my camera, and then the other one, currently it's defaulted to the front view, but I'm going to change this to the outliner. So to do so, you click on Panels, Panel, and then Outliner is this option in the list about halfway down the list. The outliner is a useful window because it shows us all the objects in our scene as a list or an outline. So I can see my various items here, and when I click on the objects, they will highlight in my outliner. I can also select them directly in the outliner too. Okay, so this is an easy way to be able to see everything in your scene, but in more of a list format. The next thing we're going to need to do is to freeze transformations on all the objects that we want to go into our group. Prior to creating a group, it's important to do a freeze transformations command because this will zero out the transformations on each of the separate pieces and provide a neutral, clean slate for the group as a whole. Not freezing transformations can cause problems down the line within the group model, so it's considered a best practice to freeze your transformations before you start grouping or combining your objects. It's a very simple process. You simply select each object, and we're going to open up a window called the channel box by clicking on this little stack in the upper right-hand corner. So if you click on that, our channel box will appear. And the channel box allows us to see all the translation, rotation, and scale values in our object. You can see there's various values here because I've manipulated this object. We can freeze transformations, which will reset everything to 0 or to default, either 1 for scale or 0 for either translation or rotation, by clicking on Channels and going to Freeze, and we're actually going to freeze all of them, the translation, rotation, and scale. So when I do that, you can see how translation and rotations reset to 0, and scale was reset to 1. What that means is that the central pivot point of the object is now reset to a value of 0 in the translation and rotation. We can also dock this into our upper right-hand corner if we want, just by dragging it up, and it'll turn blue when it's dockable. Okay, so there it is. It's one of the tabs now in our right-hand side column. Okay, so we're going to click on each item in the group and freeze the transformations. So here I can see I'm in my channel box. I'll go Channels, Freeze, All. It's going to reset everything. And then I'll just go through each item in the list. Channels, Freeze, All. I'm going to zoom in to be able to select that one. Channels, Freeze, All. And again, the reason why we're doing this is so that there's a clean slate for moving the model as a group, and it'll avoid any sorts of double transformations that might occur later on. So this is considered an important step to do. Okay, so we've froze all our transformations. Now we can group these objects together. So I can simply select them all or select them in my outliner. And the first thing we're going to do is try grouping. So I'll select these all again and go up to Edit, Group. And now you can see in my outliner, it shows that there's a new group and all of my separate items have been put into that group. So I can select everything just by clicking on the top node of the group. And I can rename it by double-clicking on it. I can name this column. So that's one easy way to group your items together. It just makes it a lot easier. If I want to move it around, I simply have to select the top node. Another method is to use the combine feature. So I'm simply going to duplicate this column. So I'll click on the top node and go Edit, Duplicate. Now I have two versions of this, and I'll pull one out. So this is a group because I duplicated the whole group, but we can also ungroup it. So we learned how to group. Let's learn how to ungroup. You simply select the top node of the group and go to Edit, Ungroup. Now they're all separated again. Now that they're separated again, I can use the combine command to put them into one object. So once again, we select all the individual parts. And this time, we go to Mesh, Combine. And we can see here, all those individual pieces are now combined into one piece of geometry, which is labeled after one of the pieces in the hierarchy. I'm just going to change this to column 2 to be more descriptive. It's helpful to rename things to be more descriptive in your outliner so that it's just more obvious what things are. So instead of individual pieces, I now have one combined piece. So either method is fine to use for the purposes of this course. In the industry, specific projects may require one method or the other. For example, game engines usually work better with the combine function. Now, go ahead and try out applying specific materials and textures to faces on your models, and also try grouping your models together using the group and combine commands. Remember to freeze transformations on all the individual parts first. And also try opening up the outliner to see all the objects in your scene in a list format. In the next video, we'll talk about the assignments for this session. In this session, we've learned about adding materials, colors, and textures to your models. Now we'll try out the various texturing techniques we've discussed through 2 assignments. The first assignment is to apply exploratory textures to one or more of your models, experimenting with different materials and colors, as well as texturing with color maps, transparency maps, and butt maps. Try applying textures to specific faces that you select, as well as the entire object. Use at least 4 techniques that have been discussed in this session. To get started, collect a wide variety of texture images. These can be sourced from the internet or created using your own photos and artwork. And place them in the Source Images folder of your Maya project folder. Then you'll have these for your disposal to use for texturing. The second assignment is to texture one or more of your models with a specific art direction. You'll serve as the art director for this assignment, and the art director's job is to develop and unify the artistic vision for the work. So I'd like you to submit answers to the following questions to help you articulate the art direction approach for your texturing. What is the visual style that you're aiming for? Is it realistic or cartoony? Is it painterly or ultra-modern? There are many possible visual styles for the texturing. Also, what kinds of materials, colors, and textures will be required to achieve the style you're aiming for? You'll need to create or find the textures needed to reach your art direction goals. If you're not sure what you wish to create, you can do some research to help you define it. Take a look at other 3D images and animations that you admire. So for the second assignment, you'll submit a written description of your art direction goals for the visual look of your model. This description should be at least 100 words. You'll also include at least 1 screenshot of the textured model. You can include more than 1 screenshot if you wish to show another view of the model. To recap, here's what's due for the texturing assignments for this session. Texture at least one of your models in an experimental fashion using at least 4 techniques discussed in the tutorials. Upload 1 screenshot from the perspective view and the Maya ASCII.ma scene file. Also, texture at least one of your models with a specific art direction. Post a written paragraph of at least 50 words that describes the visual style you're trying to achieve. Upload 1 or more screenshots of the finished and textured model as well. You can include more than 1 model in each of these assignments if you wish to have more texturing practice. And again, with each session, there are additional materials in the resources and coursework pages. These include links to textures online and resources for continuing your learning. I also encourage you to share your experiences in the forums. In the next session, we'll introduce the element of time to our scenes and learn about animation in Maya. I'm looking forward to seeing what you create.